Exodus chapter 18, verses 13 to 27. And we're going to look at some insights into leadership. And it's interesting, as we've been looking at lessons from Moses, God has prepared his people to come out of Egypt. He's prepared them that he's taking them out and teaching them to trust in him. And it's been a long, painful process. There's been a lot of complaints. There's been a lot of grumbling. And God has had, in his patience, is teaching them their new identity as his people. Well, it's no different to leadership as well. Here, Moses is going to learn some truths about leadership and what it's involved. And I can say that being a leader is hard work. And often, it's a very heavy burden that one has to carry. And it's no different for Christian men as well, because we're given the responsibility of leadership in our families. That means being a husband, being to a wife, father to children, born of that relationship. And to do that, you and I need to be the best and do the best possible job that we can do. And that is no easy task, because no man is perfect. To lead the family involves setting the right example. It means that there's something in the family for them to model. That means listening and taking in the family's opinions and advice when making decisions that will ultimately affect the whole family. Now, sometimes this will involve confrontation with others who do not understand where you're coming from or why you're doing what you're doing. Leadership also involves making mistakes. It involves failing. It involves asking forgiveness for getting things wrong. And leadership can be a lonely position. And today, we're going to have a look how God used a family member to transform Moses' leadership at this particular point in time. And I've called this, the first one, hopefully this will work, a testing confrontation in verses 13 to 16. Now, I've called it this because any time a family member is involved, things can become very testy and very trying, especially when it comes to that person giving advice to you that you never asked them to give. It's always hard to be able to listen to it. It only adds to the burden of leadership when other people come and tell you what they think you should be doing, how you could do things better, or how they would do things if they were in your position. And it's very interesting, people are armchair leaders, but to be put in the position yourself, it's a very different story from being an armchair. You can sit, you can watch, you can listen, you can see others, but when you're in that position, it's not as easy as what you think it is. There are tough decisions to be made. And there are many parts of leadership that are difficult, and I have found them difficult anyway. To provide a vision of what you want to do, and then to take people in a different direction than the one they want to go, as well as trying to deal with personal conflicts, resolve them, disputes, as well as being responsible for administration and the well-being of the organization. This is no easy task. It's the hardest thing for a leader to deal with is the knowledge that they're not leading as well as they could or should. This is a burden that isn't taken very lightly, but it's better than doing nothing. As a leader, I can see, and I do know, my failures, especially when I haven't led in the way I should, when I'm aware there doesn't seem to be much progress in relationships, and that can include a relationship in the church. It can include a relationship with my wife and children and grandchildren. Yet despite the difficulties of leadership and the weight of responsibility that it carries. I marvel at God's grace when I see the personal growth in the lives of the people that I minister to, despite my inabilities to be able to do what I should. Now, I still marvel. Over all these years, we've been through a lot. But you know, I've seen tremendous growth in the lives of the people that are here as they follow Christ. Now, that hasn't been because of me. It's been because, probably in spite of me, that God, in His grace, has grown and equipped the people that are here. Now, in our text, Jethro, we're introduced to Jethro, who happened to be Moses' father-in-law. And they came for a visit. And he brought Moses' wife, Zipporah, and his two boys with him. So it's a family reunion after a period of absence. And it doesn't take Jethro very long to see things are not what they should be. And as he observes, as he sees, he feels compelled to tell Moses about it. Now, if I was in Jethro's shoes, I would be a little fearful of stepping on toes, of giving advice to someone who's doing his best that he could. And he just happened to be married to his daughter-in-law, Zipporah. So it's not an easy situation. So it's a testy confrontation that's about to take place. And we're going to see how well that advice is received, because often it can be taken the wrong way. We're given the introduction here in verse 13. If you've got your Bibles, you can follow. I'll put it on the screen. On the next day, Moses sat to judge the people. The people stood around Moses from morning until evening. Now, let's make no mistake. Moses was God's chosen man for this task of leading over 2 million people to the promised land. And we need to understand, Moses just didn't wake up and decide with a brilliant idea, you know what, I'm going to lead 2 million people into the promised land. He didn't have that desire or dream, or that one day he would become a leader. No, this was a process. God prepared and trained Moses. Well, how long did he train and prepare him for just this occasion? How long was God's training? Moses was 80 years old when he took this position. So he spent 80 years being trained and taught and prepared for this one occasion. Think about it. How many of you are 80? I see that little hand go up. How would you like it at 80 that you're given the responsibility to take 2 million people out into the desert to the promised land? There you go. I can't even take myself to do this and this and this. Yet, here it was, 80 years of age, that God put him in this position for this task that he prepared him for all his life. Now, we think 80 years, wow. Think about it. This was a job that was not for the faint of heart. For the first 40 years of Moses' life, was educated in the finest schools that Egypt had to offer, the very best that you could get. He became well acquainted with Egyptian politics. He understood their culture. He understood their values. And it equipped him to be a skilled diplomat before Pharaoh when he asked to let my people go. Moses was well trained in military matters and strategies, as well as administration. And he was trained in administration because he had the ability to organise 2 million people. Now, I find it difficult to organise 20 people, let alone 2 million people to get them to comply and do what you want and take them on a journey. And most families here, you're preparing for camp some on Friday. You prepare the family. Who is the one that does most of the preparation? In the family. Who's the one that gets everything ready? Usually the wife, doesn't she? She's got a checklist and she goes through and she says, have you got your bathers? You got this, 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 you got this. There's a mental list she's going through. And of course, yes, yes, yes. And they get to camp. Mum, where is my shoes? I told you to pack them, didn't you? No, I thought you did. So there's the organisation that actually takes place when we have things. But we also know in his education in Egypt, it enabled Moses to write and record all the accounts of the journey, which we have as a memento for all eternity. We're told Moses was treated as if he was Pharaoh's own son. He's provided with the very best that Egypt could offer. This stood him in good stead for the future, even though Moses had no idea of how these things would be of benefit to him at the time. Now let me say, it wasn't a wasted period of time, it wasn't a wasted experience, it was equipping him for his future work. Now you might think 40 years is a long time to be equipped, but it wasn't a waste of time. The skills that he received would stand him in good stead. Now in the second 40 years of his training, he was exposed to the desert survival training. He lived in the desert area where he would take the people of God. Just happened to be the very area. And so what did Moses accomplish in the 40 years in the desert? If you and I lived in the desert, what would we know after 40 years? You would know how to survive, wouldn't you? You would know where to find shade, you would know where to find water, you'd know places to stay away from. Well, this is no different for Moses. In this time, he knew where to find food and shelter. And he knew what it would take to survive in some very, very harsh conditions. Now, in those 80 years of training, he also learned God's word. He also learned how to trust God. Now, when you think about it, 80 years is a lot of learning. It's a lot of learning. It all culminated and brought him to this one event in his life to lead the children of Israel out of Egypt and take them to the land of Canaan. This was what he was called for. This was what he was being prepared for. 80 long years of accumulation of skills and abilities. And I thought, oh, I'm not 80 yet. But you know, I wonder if Moses doubted his purpose. I wonder if he questioned why he had done all these things. I wonder whether he thought, what's the use of me doing this and this and this and this? As I look back, they haven't been of any benefit to me. I mean, you think of Egypt. The best education, best skills, administration. And where was he? Looking after sheep. Wow. What good is all that education and everything when you're looking after sheep? He could have asked himself, well, why? What's it all for? And then I guess when he actually got to the position, well, why did God wait till I was 80 years of age to give me this position? But I tell you what, he did learn the one attribute that most leaders have got to learn in that period of time is patience. An attribute, patience. A leader has to learn to wait on the Lord, and that's not an easy thing to accomplish. Sometimes that's the hardest lesson of all, is to wait upon the Lord. Moses had the responsibility of caring for the needs of the people, physically and spiritually. He was the lawgiver. He was judge among the people. And as you can imagine, there's just going to be a few problems, just a few, to sort out when you've got 2 million people. Some of it would be personal, some of it would be legal disputes that would happen on that journey. Our text says that from morning until evening, Moses met with the people day after day to do what? To listen to their problems and to resolve their disputes, or try to resolve them. It's not exactly an easy position for a leader to be in, sitting day after day, moment after moment, listening to people's problems. If you've never done it, I encourage you one day to sit there and just listen for a little while. But listening to people's problems, because it would have been very taxing on Moses from a mental perspective, from an emotional perspective, from a physical perspective. Why? Because it would have drained Moses of all his energy. And you can say, well, Pastor, all he does is sit there and listen. Well, I can tell you, when you're listening and you're dealing with people's problems for any length of time, it drains you. Mentally, emotionally, and physically. It zaps you of listening to people and their problems. But you know what? All those 80 years of training were required now. The things he had learned came back to him and enabled him to do what was required. And I guess from his perspective, he understood now why he had done those things. The training in Egypt, the training in the desert, it was a clear picture. But it took 80 years for him to understand why he was called to this position. And sometimes I think when you're waiting on God, you begin to wonder, as you look at your life, what have I achieved? What have I done? What have I accomplished with my life? You've moved from here, here, here. And I thought to myself, well, originally I thought to myself, why on earth did I do a printing apprenticeship? 5 years. And I watched that trade disappear into the modern technology, and I thought, why did I bother doing that? What use and what benefit is that going to be to me? And yet, you know, I think now I understood why. It wasn't a waste of time. But God was preparing me and giving me tools for what I could use in the future. It took Moses 80 years to realize that everything he had done was for a purpose. It was for preparation. So there's nothing that we do that's a waste of time. There's no experience of no benefit to us. At the time, we might think, oh, what a waste that was. But you know, the Lord has a sense of humor where he brings it back, and you remember, now I understand why I did that, and I did that, and I did that, because there's a future need for it. Every believer's experience is unique and different. And God is in the process of preparing you and me for some task in the future. And so my challenge to you is learn what you can and allow God to teach you in the good times like Moses had in Egypt, and then in the hard, dry times of the wilderness. This is the training ground where your experiences will enable you to help others who are going through some tough times as well. The very trials and tribulations you go through are for a purpose. And sometimes it's just to be there and assist others who are going through very difficult times like you have been, as an encouragement. Moses was a man who could do anything he set his mind to. He was a man's man. But you know, and he wasn't too proud not to accept advice from Jethro, to listen, to evaluate and do things in a better way. That's a true leader. That's a person who's willing to learn. Now here's the inquiry in verse 14. When Moses' father-in-law saw all that he was doing for the people, he said, "Moses, what is this you're doing for the people? Why are you sitting by yourself and all the people stand around you from morning until evening?" See, Jethro hadn't been there very long, but it didn't take him long to see there's a big problem with the way that Moses was doing things among the people. He saw the responsibility, he saw what Moses was doing, but he also saw the inefficiencies of Moses' methods. He understood that if Moses didn't change the way he did things, he was going to wear himself out very quickly. Now, understand, Jethro didn't believe that Moses should be expected to do everything for the people. He understood that Moses' skill and time could be better used for the good of all the people rather than just the few hundred people he was doing on a daily basis. Moses needed to be convinced that he should share the responsibility of listening and dealing with minor matters of people and give that to other capable people who could be used to achieve this in a more effective way, thus freeing Moses up to use his time and talents where it counted the most. In other words, the whole group of people rather than just a certain group of people. Now, how does Jethro do this in a way that doesn't give him a clip around the ear? I would be thinking, wow, what do I say to Moses? And if we read the front of the first few verses, Moses was doing a wonderful job. The Lord was blessing. It was there, and Jethro acknowledged that. But he also saw that things could be done a better way. But he didn't shrink from confronting Moses. And I like the way that it puts it. What do you think you're doing with all these people? And why are you doing it for? What's the reason you're doing it? Don't you know you'll suffer from burnout syndrome the way you're going? A very legitimate question. And you know, in that way in which Jethro went about inquiring, I call it inquiring, but just confronting Moses, he didn't attack his person. He didn't say, "Moses, you're a stupid person for what you're doing. You know, if you'd had any sense." He didn't do that. He just asked the legitimate question, "What are you doing? And why are you doing it this way? Don't you know you'll burn out if you keep doing it this way?" And Moses replied, what I call the inundation. In verses 15 and 16, Moses said to his father-in-law, "Because the people come to me to inquire of God, when they have a dispute, it comes to me, and I decide between a man and his neighbour, and I'll make known the decrees of God and his laws." So our text tells us that Moses answered Jethro by saying, "Look, the people come to me as God's representative. They want to know what his laws are. And I understand that this is a natural expectation of the people. They want to know how God will deal with them in certain matters. And being God's rep, I'm in that position where I need to make myself available." That's a logical conclusion. Now understand, Moses was no slouch when it came to organisational skills. He knew how to organise people and places and things. He knew how to administrate, get things done due to his training. So I think he would have had some sort of system that he was employing with some basic practices in place so that it could help the large number of people that he had to deal with every day to know what's right and wrong. And the people expected Moses, in that position as leader, to be the officiating umpire or referee. In other words, to give them the right and proper judgments between them. They trusted him because he was God's rep to do the right thing. Now that's an awful responsibility. It's not to be taken lightly. The flaw with this type of leadership is to think that you're indispensable, that you're the only one that is capable of doing this, that you must call all the shots. That's the problem that can happen in leadership, that you make yourself indispensable so that you are available at all beck and call of everybody who rings. Maybe he thought, if I'm not involved in this, the people won't get the justice they deserve. Maybe he thought, without me, everything will fall apart. Maybe he thought, it's easier for me to do this than to give it to somebody else to do who might not do it as well as I would. They are the conflicting thoughts that many leaders have to deal with when they're in charge of people and have a responsibility. Moses was trying to teach the people God's law, and he was trying to do it on a one-to-one basis. When one person came up, he would spend that time teaching the law to that person. That person would go away, another person would take his place, and Moses would have to repeat the process again and again and again and again all day long. This was time-consuming. It was not making the best use of his time and abilities, because his main responsibility was to teach the whole 2 million people, not just 50 or 60 or 70 that he did during the day. Moses was trying to do it his own way. His intentions were honourable, but you know what? They were not going to accomplish or help those who needed his teaching. All the people needed to be taught the truths and statutes of the law. He was inefficient. He was not effective as a leader. He was failing himself, he was failing God, and he was failing the people when he continued to do things this way. The problem for Moses was the people were becoming more dependent on him to solve their problems rather than they were turning to God and getting him to solve their problems. And that's a process of leadership that is also very difficult, because people ring the pastor, they ring the leader, talk to me, solve my problems. And 9 times out of 10, when you find in your counselling of them, they haven't taken it to God in prayer, they haven't sought his help or his advice. Ring the pastor, ring this person, ring that person, give it to somebody else and let them carry the burden. Every 50 people that Moses dealt with, 100 more would line up to see him, and no doubt he was seeing many of the same people again for different problems that would line up. Where there are people, there'll always be problems. So that's the situation that Jethro, in his observation, says to Moses, what do you think you're doing? What are you doing? And I'm going to close it there. And the reason I'm closing it there, because there's so much more that I need to be able to give, and I know your attention span is, you would like it a little less. What I'm saying here is that we need to understand and get some insights. Leaders haven't got everything. They haven't got the answers to every life situations. They have a responsibility, and we need to understand what leadership's involved. We need to see that God is dealing with leaders just as he is other people. And we're going to find out probably next time as I talk about the time for change, because change is very difficult for many people to accept. Time to change methodologies, not the message, but the methodologies, the way we do things, and understanding why are people reluctant or resistant to change. And sometimes it's because we become comfortable and we don't want to be taken out of our comfort zones. So I'll leave you with that. So after camp, we will continue and pick up. with insights into leadership as the team comes.